Our host, the world-renowned Christine Enville, an IFBB professional, 3 times world champion, a mentor, an icon, and of course, a founding co-owner of the best supplements money can buy, International Protein. In this podcast, Christine explains if plant-based proteins are just as effective for building muscle as dairy. And even if you did consume dairy, why you'd want to consider adding plant-based supps into your mix anyway. She tells us when the best time of the day is to use a plant-based product, and we also investigate the world stage and which competitors are already using them. So Christine, plant-based proteins, are they just as effective as normal proteins, whey proteins? And you know, like I'm a little lactose intolerant, so if I drink dairy or whatever, the chest tightens up a little bit, and that's why I like your WPI, which is low lactose. So let's go back to the first question: are plant-based proteins just as effective?
Okay, it's a really, really simple answer, and it's unfortunately no. They're not as effective. That's not saying that they don't still build muscle, but research shows that they are definitely not as effective at actually being anabolic and creating muscle growth. So there's a lot of things that you've covered there, Ash. So we'll kind of like take a little bit of a step back because obviously plant-based proteins are becoming more and more popular. Definitely, you know, over the last 5 years, we've seen more creep onto the market. And even, you know, as far back as, 20 years ago, people were using soy proteins as a vegetarian option to whey proteins, or people who had, some of the lactose intolerances and dairy allergies that you're talking about. But just coming back to the effectiveness, studies that show that when you consume like a whey-based protein or a meat protein, it has a different magnitude of the effect on what they call a growth factor, IGF-1, which is really the part which is responsible for starting that muscle growth. And it is definitely a lot lower in plant-based protein. So eating the same amount of protein coming from plant versus coming from an animal-based protein or even a dairy protein, you will not get the same magnitude of effect. So you're not going to be able to build as much muscle. As I said, you can still build muscle, but you're not going to get those quick gains, and you're probably not going to get the gains to the degree that somebody who is eating purely like a whey-based diet. However, coming back to plants, another reason why a lot of the time people will struggle with that is because most plant-based proteins are missing at least one of the essential amino acids. And I think we've talked in some of the episodes about how important all of the essential amino acids are. One, because your body doesn't synthesize any of those, so you do have to consume them. And number two, that they're essential because you need all of them, and you need all of them in particular amounts. So whilst the plant proteins may have some of those amino acids, they don't have them in enough that your body can actually recognize that to go and build another protein or build an enzyme or do what it needs to do with protein. So the way that it works with the body is it actually, will combine the different amino acids, and it needs them in certain ratios to do that effectively. And if it goes looking for the amino acid that it needs to create that sequence and it doesn't find it, it essentially just tags all of that protein and kind of says, oh, that's got to be used for fuel. That has to be turned into glucose. It has to be used as an energy fuel, not as a building block, not as a protein, not as an enzyme. So essentially, unless you're very careful about the way that you combine your plant proteins, you can end up in a situation where you're not taking in the correct sequence of amino acids. So it's not effectively used for protein building as well. Whereas your your meat-based proteins, your whey proteins, your caseins, anything from dairy has all of those amino acids in the correct ratio and more, like in excess of what you need. Hence, it has that greater impact on the factor which actually causes muscle growth.
So does that mean that anybody using a plant-based protein should use your amino recovery product, for example, in combination?
Well, I guess it depends on why they're using plant-based, because unfortunately, if they are vegan, amino recovery does contain casein protein.
Right.
It does contain a hydrolyzed form of casein protein, which means that it's dairy-based. Casein making up 80% of the component of milk. And particularly if it's for allergy reasons, and just coming back to what you touched on with the chest tightening up, I dare say that's not a lactose intolerance. That sounds to me more like a casein allergy. If you're not getting a problem with our WPI, which is a whey-based protein, yeah. So obviously I'm not quite sure if we've ever talked about this, but obviously milk is made up of protein, mm-hmm. and it's made up of 2 main proteins, and that being whey and casein. And casein makes up 80% of the protein that's in milk, and 20% of that is made up from whey. So obviously when they make protein, they are able to separate those two proteins because they behave quite differently under different conditions. So you can, cause the casein to gel, like hence what cheese is or cottage cheese or yogurt, and the whey is soluble at lower pHs. So they can separate out those two proteins and just get the whey stream or just get the casein stream. And that's how we're able to make products like whey protein isolate and whey protein concentrate versus a casein. So you can take a whey protein isolate. It is also very, very low lactose, but it doesn't have any casein with it. But lactose intolerance is not an allergy as much as it's an actual lack of an enzyme in the body to break the lactose back down into single sugars, because it's obviously two different sugars bound together, and it needs to be broken into single sugars for the body to digest it. So if you lack that enzyme, the lactase enzyme, to do that, that's where you have all the diarrhea and the gas and stomach cramps, and that's what's normally associated with the lactose intolerance.
Well, I'm not admitting to any of that other stuff, not on a broadcast anyway. But
so you maybe do have a lactose intolerance, but the chest tightening is a sign of an actual allergy, which is a histamine reaction, and that's where the body's say like it's not able to deal with that protein, like it's kind of recognizing that protein as foreign. So things which cause that, obviously, famously peanuts, shellfish is another really, really common one. Obviously, dairy is a hugely common one where people have a reaction to it.
It just tastes so good though. Like, I'll go through the pain. I don't care. It tastes so good. Yeah.
Look, and that's everybody's individual choice. But if it does come down to lactose, then, the WPI doesn't have a lot of lactose. But that's one of the reasons why people might be using a plant-based protein, and in which case something like the Amino Recovery absolutely has all of the amino acids in it. What they also can do, and it does take a little bit more work and a little bit more diligence, is to go and look at what they can combine of the different type of plant proteins, because nature kind of made it like if you're a legume, and all the people who are vegans will very clearly know what the legumes are.
They're like peas and
beans. Peanut is actually a legume, believe it or not. But
it should be called a pea bean, shouldn't it, really? It's not a nut at all, is it?
No, it's not a nut at all. It's a pea bean. So peanuts are not nuts. They're legumes. Your chickpeas, your soybeans, all of those kind of things fit into that family. And then on the other side, you have your grains. So you have your rices and your corn and barley and oats and wheat and all those kind of things which are grains. So the way that nature kind of made it is those two things are kind of complementary, and like what's one missing one particular amino acid, the other ones are generally kind of high in that amino acid, and that's why people will combine rice and beans, or they'll combine a grain and a pulse, a grain and a legume, and they will be able to get a complete protein in that way. So that's kind of why those things go together. And a lot of cultures who eat a lot of more plant-based foods, you'll notice that that's how they combine. Like, Brazil, every meal would be like rice and beans. And I know there's a lot of, Mexican foods,
yep.
Heavy reliance on beans and rice, and those two complement and create a complete protein. So that's essentially what that means, is that they just need to be more mindful to make sure that they do get that complete complement. There are a number of plant-based proteins, like quinoa is considered to have all of the essential amino acids. However, the amount of protein in that is like really low, that you just have to eat so much of it. So it's more classified in the carbohydrate grouping because it is predominantly more of a carbohydrate. But people will point out that does have all of the complete amino acids, but you're just not getting enough of them because the density of the protein in that food is quite low. Another protein which it went out of favor, it was real, like soy protein was so popular back in like the late 90s, early 2000s. People were switching from, dairy protein over to soy milks. And I was fortunate enough to be working in the industry at that particular point in time. I was working for a dairy company, believe it or not. And we made a soy milk. We made Soy Life fresh soy milk. The thing with soy, again, it's like all soys are not equal, but the particular isolate that this one company kind of created, and that was really by they kind of were manipulating and adding back in amino acids from different plant streams and kind of like isolating the soy and building up the amount of that particular protein and putting it back in. They were able to create a complete protein with a soy protein, and they did a lot of research. Like they spent, hundreds of thousands of dollars researching whether athletes could use this particular product, what effect it would have on their performance, and it was all positive. Like, they were all able to, grow muscle, recover properly, and they put a lot of effort and energy into that. And back in those days, there was a fair amount of soy protein protein was used in a lot of the sports supplements, but it kind of hit at the time that GMO hit, genetically modified, and unfortunately they had in America, they hadn't really kind of cared, like, it's genetically modified, who cares, and they had actually mixed all the crops together.
Yeah.
So it was impossible to say that, the stream was GMO free at that point in time. And whilst they did put in all kind of steps to be able to do that, it just really hit the industry. And then everyone kind of got confused about phytoestrogens and whether it, made men feminine and it just...
That was what my concern was. Like, I don't need bigger boobies than I've already got,
Yeah, but I mean, it was, and I think there was so much research out in the positive benefits for particularly like menopausal women, and for the fact that, it worked like estrogen, but it wasn't as strong as estrogen. So, but somehow people kind of got that confused and just thought that would do that to it. And, there was a lot of what I guess I call quack research out there where people would just kind of not really look at the facts and just kind of, jump on one little part and say, it causes testicular cancer and all kind of things like that. And I don't think there was any basis to that, but it just kept such a stigma that we've just really seen people just turn 100% off it, even though there was the men, maybe take it or leave it, but for women, definitely, going into their menopausal years, there was a lot of research done. So it not only, beneficial for, retaining muscle as they got older and doing sport, but also just, cutting back on all those, menopausal symptoms and things, but it's been pretty much taken over by pea protein. But the unfortunate thing with the pea protein is it's almost like there hasn't been as much research put into it, because whether it's just that bad experience of, we'll build it all up and then someone will find a reason to hate it and it'll be off the market. Like, people like trends and fads, but pea's really taken over just because it's palatable. Like, if anyone's tried to use rice protein, it's almost like drinking sand. It's kind of not that great, but it does have a really important role to complement the pea protein and give people like what they need. But it's one of those things where it becomes personal taste. And, we obviously at International have our vegan range coming out, or we're calling it more of our plant-based range, because whilst it is vegan, we actually do recognise the importance of plant proteins in nutrition, and we will talk about that as a separate thing. But
Old Troy, the first time I met him, he was saying, I've got the tastiest pea, have a drink. Yeah. So I like the fact that you guys can say that as well.
Yeah, well.
Drink my pea.
drink. We never really thought of it like that, Ash, but...
Really? I mean, you spend most of your days with Troy.
But I mean, in terms of saying drink my pea... I was...
No, but Troy's one of the other directors of International Protein, for that doesn't know. He's one of the co-founders.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. We call it the Troy test, or the kid test, or the Troy test. If a product... Because Troy didn't even like protein powder when we started International Protein. Like, he didn't... He would prefer to eat food, like, real food, and just thought they all tasted like garbage and really didn't want to have to use them. And that was some part of that. Like, I'm a hardcorer, so I will put up with something. I mean, goodness, I was, without saying anything really bad, I was sponsored by a very well-known Australian company at the time, and the stuff was pretty unpalatable, but I would manage to like mix it down with other proteins that I would get from, the dairy company next door. I think we talked about how I was across the road from Fonterra, New Zealand milk products at the time, and I would make my own concoctions to try to make this stuff palatable, but Troy would refuse point blank. So we had to make products that were good and acceptable to the person who didn't like a protein supplement. Mm-hmm. And that's why also kids are a good test, because kids are pretty honest about what they do and don't like.
So that's why he's so focused on having the very best taste.
Absolutely. Yeah, because he says we shouldn't just make this, people who are hardcore and people who have to use these products have no choice. And that's always been an issue for anyone who's gluten intolerant, anyone who's lactose intolerant, anyone who is vegan or, dairy intolerant, who has to take alternative type of products. I think their big complaint is always that there's really nothing suitable on the market. Like, you always feel like you're eating second best, because that's just, people just put something out there because it fits that need, but it could be as tasteless and horrible because they had no other choice. Like, they had to eat it. And that's definitely not the direction that we want to go. We want to make something that, as we say, even a whey drinker will have these products and without knowing the other benefits of plant proteins, because whilst they may not be the best and absolute best for building muscle, there's a lot of other advantages to them, which we will talk about. But we want to make them in a way that people can incorporate them into their diet without feeling like they're, it's a thing that it's good for me, so I'll do it. They want to do it because they want to enjoy it, and I think we've absolutely nailed that. So I'm excited for when they do actually come out. Yeah,
I'll give you my honest, true opinion. on this podcast.
Yes.
Of whether I like it or not. We'll do a little taste test.
Cool. So, that'll be probably next time we do it, about a month from now. Hopefully those should be out. So that'll be early to mid-July 2020 for anyone who's listening to this in the future. But I'll come back to the reasons around plant proteins, other than, you may be straight out allergic to dairy products, or you may be, obviously with lactose there are other options, or there are whey options like our amino-charged WPI, where, I would say 99% of people with lactose intolerance are able to consume that product. We have that feedback. Obviously, ethical is one of the big ones, where the people who don't want to have, any kind of animal product, or even, dairy products, which are actually, they're not technically a flesh of a product. They're obviously like a secretion. Allergies is, the main reason, ethical. One of the things which I didn't mention, obviously, around that muscle building part of it is the factor which causes that muscle growth is also linked to cancer. So at normal consumption levels, where people are having their dairy products and whatnot, there's not too much of an issue. But once you start to run into that level of where someone maybe does have a higher risk of cancer, and this is as we age, the studies around putting people onto plant protein and actually like reversing the risk of cancer, or even actually reversing a cancer, are very, very strong. So what I'm kind of finding, and what I'm seeing in the industry, and why we've gone with like a really sports targeted plant-based protein, is that you need to be mindful of how much meat-based proteins and how much dairy-based protein you are eating, because as you get older, obviously your risk for cancer does become higher, and having a mixture of both plant and animal-based for your protein source, I think is really important for that anti-cancer property. So to me, that's the big one. So
you'd actually mix it. Okay.
Yeah,
but reduce
my dairy and animal, and incorporate a portion of that coming from plant. Now, if I was in an actual situation where I had a cancer, or I had a very high risk, maybe some people have a lot of history of cancer in their family, I would be probably incorporating more and more. So I would be doing it for health reasons.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that's
and when you're mixing it, would you use them at different times?
Yes. Yeah. Obviously, as you know, Ash, I like to put a little bit of protein at every single meal.
Yeah.
You could use an approach, I guess, of having a little bit of plant-based and a little bit of, animal at every meal.
Yeah.
But to simplify things, I would probably just, take out one of my my meals where I was having a dairy-based protein shake and put in a plant-based one.
Yeah. Sorry. What I meant was, you just had a really hard workout, and do you hit your animals protein at that point, and then go to sleep on your plant-based?
Now I would actually, I would actually do that, and the reason I would do that is because all of these plant-based proteins are actually what we call medium-release proteins. Mm-hmm. Okay, so again, coming back to how proteins are treated by the body, your whey protein isolates, hydrolyzed products are very rapidly absorbed, and that's what you want post-workout. Then you creep into like your egg is more medium absorption, and your caseins are longer term. Now, all of your plant proteins, whether it be pea, whether it be rice, whether it be soy, all generally fall in that 3 to 4 hour mark. So if you're having a plant-based protein post-workout, it's really not quick enough. It's definitely an ideal pre-workout protein. It's definitely a good nighttime protein. However, very, very excited. International Protein, we have actually we've got our hands on some hydrolyzed plant protein. So plant protein peptides, which I don't believe there's any other products on the market at this stage who have those. So we're really excited to be able to put those into our products. So they will be suitable for people to use post-workout.
Awesome.
So that is that is really and that's what I'm saying. We went really sports targeting. There's a lot of general nutrition plant-based proteins out there on the market, but we're a sports company. We're a sports nutrition company, and I wanted to have something that was offering an alternative to our core followers, people who use our products, and a lot of our demography have grown up with it. So now they're the same age as me. They're in their 40s and they want to eat more healthfully, but they don't want to lose any of the advantages that they're getting out of having a traditional, sports protein powder. So we've put those more rapidly digested and rapidly absorbed versions of a plant protein into the product, and makes them very, very much more suitable for using, straight after a workout, or as a, but to me, ideally, pre-workout, I would put that in there kind of with our synergy. like, not quite as long acting, but definitely in that range, where it's a really, really great pre-workout kind of a product. But yeah, certainly adding that more rapidly digested form of plant protein gives it that extra functionality and allows it to behave more like the traditional whey proteins and that. But just in terms of, your day-to-day, how you utilize them, the powders can be used just like what you use a whey protein powder. The meal, we have one called Meal MRP Refeed. So it's like you've got carbs in it. So, it's a really great refeed energy type of product. And that one, again, it's you can just use that instead of like extreme mass or, just utilize it as an actual meal replacement, and maybe take out one of your chicken meals or one of your steak or fish meals or something like that. So, yeah, very, very flexible in what you can do with them. But again, it's not strictly for vegans or people with allergies. I'm actually saying that, now as people get older, it's a really great opportunity to kind of, improve your diet that little bit more and go for a little bit more plant-based and at least start to, as I say, you don't have to go cold turkey, go 100% move over to plant-based, but you definitely should be starting to introduce that just to minimise that risk, because it's a risk factor. And as I said, the studies where they have actually turned people off wholly, animal proteins, where there has been a situation with cancer, they've been able to, halt that cancer by putting the plant-based proteins in there. So that's a really very powerful and very important reason to be using a plant-based protein, I believe.
So you obviously really condone using multiple proteins, whereas I imagine most people actually just stick to one. Is that correct?
Look, that's something which I have seen more now recently. Like, believe it or not, when I started, people were a lot more focused on the different types of proteins and understanding that, egg was different to casein, was different to a whey, was different to a soy, and which was different to like a whole milk protein. And people were very much aware that they did actually have, different benefits even for whether you were trying to grow muscle or you were trying to cut up.
Yeah.
But nowadays, I guess with more and more people coming into it and a little bit less people really delving deep into what's behind protein and what they're taking. A lot of the products on the market really just do go for a good amount of protein. So they might have 60 to 70% protein. So it's a nice price for someone to buy. It's mostly whey. It may have a little bit of casein in it. So people are not as conscious as to why they were taking different types of proteins. And I guess that's why we're trying to educate that without going crazy and having to have a different one for every different time. It's to me, I look at it like, if you, and even though I do this myself and eat pretty much just chicken, a lot of people do like to mix it up and have, they'll have steak one night, they might want to have lamb another, might have fish a different night, they might have chicken, they might have a different type of a cut of steak or something. So people do generally tend to like to mix up their dietary intake. There's very few people, other than really hardcore bodybuilders, I guess, who go in there day in, day in and just eat the same food. So when it's the same thing comes to your protein, something like our Synergy where we have blended every different type of, dairy-based plus the egg. We don't have any plant-based protein in that particular product, but we've combined all the different types of proteins to get those different amino acid profiles because every different protein has its own signature amino acid profile, which makes it different to the next protein.
So tell me very quickly, before we wrap this up, what kind of mix of proteins do you use?
Well,
and it's probably different at different times, right?
It is, and I must admit that right now I am, mostly because I'm kind of testing out our gourmet WPI.
Yeah.
So this is kind of an anomaly. I would never normally just have a WPI, in one of my meals, but I like to use our products for, a good period of time because, I like to test when not my intolerance physically, but when I'm I'm sick of this flavor, because there's a cycle to when, you have something and then you kind of decide you need to switch on to something else. So I just like to test, to make sure it's not, I like it for one serve kind of thing. But always what I would do is I would always have my blend of different proteins. So I would try to have more of my caseins and my wheys in my pre-workout because I want that sustained delivery. Also, your casein protein has a lot of, call it anti-pain factors. So you could actually get reduce that workout soreness coming in from that. Also, obviously, your WPI, your quick acting post-workout. That's very, very quickly absorbed. So I like to have those kind of main ones. But when it came to off-season and gaining weight, I actually, back in the day would always recommend that people include some type of plant-based protein into the mix with their, their whey and maybe some egg. And this is if people, I guess, are kind of building their own type of protein. just to have that as a mixture to help with their muscle gain, and obviously incorporating more of the egg protein in that off season as well. It's it's a whole food kind of very, very well balanced amino acid profile. And then as far as eating, I kind of like to still have my chickens and my meats and fishes and things like that at evening type meals. There's probably not a lot of reason behind that, other than they are a bit slower to digest. So I think that they're not really appropriate around training. Like if you're trying to get recovery in quickly, then eating a steak straight after training is like ludicrous, because it might help tomorrow's training, but it's definitely not helping today's. But it's just too long of a period of breakdown to get that protein in. And then also with like breakfast, I do like to have something with a little bit of WPI in it, because remember, you've been all night, and whilst you might have had some casein the night before, you still want to have something which gets in relatively quickly, so you're not, again, like if you have a casein first thing in the morning, your body has been through a fast, and then it's got to wait all that time until it starts to get the benefit of the amino acids out of there. So I like to have something which has got a little bit of a quick boost of protein coming in to get it into your system straight away, but then something which normally carries through. But as I said, I'm actually having WPI first thing in the morning as a testing of the product. And it's all okay, because it's not that long of a time between my meals. It's only like about 3 hours. So, it's not a bad distance of time to be able to then have my next meal, which happens to be chicken.
Yeah.
Yeah. But we can actually do another topic on kind of like the ratios, because it's not just the ratio of the protein, it's also the ratio of your whole diet, off season to on season, and what's best for building muscle and what's best for cutting up fat whilst maintaining lean muscle. And unfortunately, again, this is where I probably lament a little bit the fact that soy has gone away in popularity, because it was a really good diet as protein. It did actually help with a lot of the satiety, and it helped with the I have to go back and look up what it was. There's a couple of other factors which really had a big impact on weight loss. And when I was prepping for a lot of my world championships, I did actually used to incorporate soy into my diet pretty heavily, and also as a savoury protein, because I would get the plain protein from the company and mix it up with more savoury type spices and like use that as a paste on my chicken, like a sauce.
Interesting.
Yeah. So
Interesting.
I did some weird things with my food.
Yes, no doubt. Okay, last thing. No, you wanted to say something?
No, because there was you had asked me before in discussion about whether or not I knew any plant-based bodybuilders.
And that was the question I was about to ask. So go for it.
Ash, I bet you to it.
You did.
So I had a bit of a look, and there's a couple. I think there's a couple of Indian bodybuilders, because obviously vegetarianism, and because we didn't talk about that as well, religious reasons, that is another impact, and particularly with bodybuilding actually being so huge in India. And he's a pretty big dude who eats that type of diet. I will say that obviously I know a lot of professional bodybuilders compete at Olympia level, and I don't know not one of those who doesn't consume huge amounts of obviously chicken, red meat. In America, they are probably a little bit even less on using protein supplements, and I think that's a lot of it is distrust of the supplements that are on the market over there. So they kind of don't, they rather just they trust the food, so they will stick with the food, and also a lot of misunderstanding over there around the different types of proteins, which you would think they would know more, but Australia is actually streets ahead when it comes to our knowledge of supplements. But yeah, in terms of the highest level bodybuilders who have achieved that, like I said, ultimate size. No, I don't know of any, but as I said, there's a couple of Indian guys who are very, very huge who are actually vegetarian, so it can be done. I think the thing with vegan and vegetarian-based diets, I had a little bit of a listen to a couple of podcasts around this, particularly relating to sport, when we were looking at developing the products. And the one thing that really stood out to me, it wasn't so much that because they were saying how fantastic they felt being on these vegan diets and all this, but when they actually broke it down, it was the fact that they were following structured diets. Before that, they were kind of just eating ad hoc, but obviously with having to combine different types of proteins and combine their foods better, they'd gotten on with dietitians and been given a structured diet. And to me, that's like the basis of bodybuilding, is a structured diet. So all it was saying to me was that they had got onto a really great diet pattern, and if they had done that regardless of the food choices, if they had had a structured diet, they would have felt those same kind of benefits. So, and then I think that was the same thing with that documentary that came out as well. A lot of the basis of it was that people come from having a pretty ad hoc kind of eating regime, and then they suddenly get put on a program where they're consistent, and they're like, oh my God, I had these amazing results. It's like, yeah, it was the consistency more so than the necessary. Like, obviously it has to be the right type of food as well, but it's not specifically like if you did a research study and put people onto a consistent program who hadn't been on a program and fed one type of protein and one another type of protein, you probably find there was more the consistency that did it than specifically the type of protein that, you know, gave them that sense of well-being. And that's where I come back to the timing of eating to training is critical.
Right.
So nothing to do with vegetarianism, but I just wanted to put that in there.
Cool. All right. So for anybody that has been listening but would love to ask questions, please join our Aussie Muscle Guru Facebook group. That's a closed private little group where people can ask questions. We actually give awards to the best questions, give prizes, and from that we'll actually answer your questions on these podcasts. Thanks very much, Christine.
Thank you, and look out for Plant Power in a few weeks.
Words of wisdom. If you like what you've heard, recognise that these tips, they're free. So show your support by becoming a loyal international protein customer by jumping online, hunt our product down and hit that buy now button. So once again, like, share and subscribe to our podcast so we can continue to bring you these episodes from our one and only Aussie Muscle Guru, 3 times world champion, Christine Enville.